All right, guys. So I think we're live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The first few minutes, we're just going to do a recap um, till everyone else joins us so that we're not wasting any of your times. Okay, so I think we're live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The first few minutes, we're just going to do a recap. Okay, so I think we're live. Thank you. There is some issue. All right, perfect. All right, so I'd just like to take a review of what we did yesterday, and I'm just going to share my screen here. I hope you guys can all see this. Uh, so yesterday, we spoke about what research is, that it's basically looking for a question and finding out answers. I gave you a couple of videos which would help you analyze what research questions look like and how you can frame them, the who, what, why, where, when, and why, and how you should move in a funnel method from a broad area of broad topic to a narrower topic, and you should just not start with the narrow topic that you may have heard on TV or in the news or read in the newspapers. Um, so uh, again, after you have established this narrow topic, you need to convert it into a question. We spoke about athletics and college students and whether we could have, say, a study on the stress related performance. If an athlete is stressed, will that affect the athlete's performance outcome? Or it could be even related to how athletes deal with stress, etc. So once you have identified a topic, depending on your background research, you can see what sort of questions that haven't been answered so far and what you can help answering to the medical community. Um, and publishing data, whether you thought, whether, so we usually as researchers always set out with a goal of, okay, I think this is what I'm going to get, this is the results I'm going to get from my study. And most often we do or don't get that result. So even if we don't get that result, we shouldn't be disheartened, because as we spoke about it yesterday, it would help you to still publish that data in a journal that's willing to publish it, because it would still bring out information that, okay, stress is not related to athletic performance or etc. Right? We again spoke about the different types of articles, the original articles, which is the most common type, along with case reports that you will be involved with as an MBBS student or as a resident in MSMD DNB. We spoke about review articles, which are a little complex and can be performed by someone with a fairly decent knowledge in statistics. And clinical trials are the highest form. So all your vaccines have undergone, although accelerated clinical trials, the COVID vaccines. So they're the highest, usually along with meta-analysis and systemic reviews are the usually of the highest level of evidence that we as medical professions can rely on. So evidence levels of articles, again, I spoke about it, Dr. Parag spoke about it. This is essentially the descending order list of how reliable a particular article is. So systematic reviews, meta-analysis, randomized control trials, etc. They will be the level 1 evidence, which means that they're the most reliable. If you want to get details of a particular pathology, say if hepatitis C causes cancer causes liver cancer, then it would be best to rely on level 1 evidences. If they're not available, you move to level 2, level 3, etc. So that's why this levels of evidence pyramid is designed so that you know what to refer to when you're trying to get information. We spoke about why you should do research, not just because of your USMLE or PLAB. It helps yourself as a medical practitioner. It helps other doctors in your field know what's new, what new knowledge is present, how you are working towards it. It helps you get your name out there. And definitely for your patients and community at large, if we hadn't done research, we probably wouldn't come up with the COVID vaccines that we have today and looking towards the end of this pandemic. So definitely, we as medical practitioners, I personally believe that it's our duty to get involved in research, and that's why we should do it. So I think that concludes essentially the recap of yesterday. Uh, I don't believe. So, what are the differences between survey and research? Um, Survey is a type of research. However, that surveys could be marketing surveys, could be a number of different things. So surveys come under cross-sectional type of studies where you are taking one point in time and analyzing what the current trend is. Um, so yeah, surveys could, if they have been vetted by an ethics committee or have sound statistical analysis, could be considered a cross-sectional type of study, and they would be a part of the original articles, right? So let's move on to today's topics, starting with, just give me 1 second. Starting with looking for research articles, which includes information about PubMed and Google Scholar and how you actually can look for articles in the most efficient way. Um, so yeah, so let's move on to that for now. Yeah, I hope you guys can all see this. Yeah, so um, looking for research articles can be as simple as Googling them. However, you're more likely to come across a lot of blog posts and a lot of websites that aren't involved in doling out real research methods or actual research that they themselves have performed. It would just be a synopsis of what the author or the writer thinks of that particular topic. So looking for research articles is a little more complex than doing a simple Google search, but I'll tell you how you can make your life easier throughout this presentation. Um, so how do you do your background research? Yesterday, we spoke a lot about the importance of performing background research before moving on to define your research question. If you guys remember that cycle of defining a topic, doing background research, coming back to the topic, modifying it, etc., till you find the perfect topic. So, so how can you find the exact resources that you need to not only define your research question, but also move on to the background research your question needs so that you're very well versed with your topic, right? We look at some online resources that researchers use, how you can filter your results, because as you will see, there are a multitude of papers. I think we spoke yesterday about Elsevier itself publishing about 3,65,000 studies every year. Um, so we'll talk about how you can filter your search and how you can get down to the actual papers that you need yourself. So there are a few online resources available, most popular of which are Google Scholar and PubMed. Uh, so the days of sifting through thousands of pages of articles to get to the ones you really want are gone. The digital age has made looking for articles very, very easy for you all. Some databases that researchers use are listed here. The first two, like I said, are the most popular ones. So, but before we move on to how to actually search on these databases, you need to understand uh, that uh, these web engines are a treasure trove of information. A simple search can lead to more than 1 million results at times, and with some results having nothing to do with what you want. So it's not like a Google search that we're used to on a daily basis. If you want to prove a friend wrong, or if we have some argument with our parents where we can just make a Google search and say, hey, this is the result and I was right or you were wrong, and stuff like that. So we will need to sift through and read tens and hundreds of articles sometimes to make sure that they are exactly what we're looking for and can play a part in us understanding the background of our research question, right? So today we're going to be talking about Google Scholar and PubMed. There are a number of resources like Embase and Cochrane, etc., which have their own advantages and disadvantages. We'll be focusing on the first two for now. So let's start with Google Scholar. As you can imagine, the interface of Google Scholar is much like your Google search. However, the analyzing the results is objectively more difficult than Google search because, as you can imagine, Google indexes a lot of information, and that's why it becomes a problem of finding a needle in a haystack, because you are going to have to look through a lot of articles, read through at least a lot of titles or abstract to figure out whether this article is relevant to you or not. Um, it's a problem of plenty because Google Scholar has indexed a large number of journals from science as well as non-science journals. right? So you will find journals which are to do with engineering, law, commerce, etc. So Google Scholar is not a search engine oriented towards medical education only. It's for scholars of all fields. So it's especially important when you're trying to use the search database, that you don't have to sift through thousands of pages because just to get 8 or 9 articles that are of interest to you. So that's why it's important to know how you can modify your searches to yield the best and most efficient results. So, however, it's a problem of good and bad, since there are a lot of journals that are indexed on Google Scholar. This ensures that this is the most complete search engine for your background search needs. However, a lot of journals are listed because Google Scholar has a very low threshold for accepting journals into its search engine, unlike PubMed, something which is exclusive. So, how Google also works, or how Google Scholar works, is you would have, say, 50 or 100 websites that are present there, and you would the Google would onboard you saying, okay, this website will be part of our search results. And the same is with Google Scholar. So Google Scholar would accept any and all journals, whether they're predatory, whether they have a high impact factor, a low impact factor. Google needs results, right? So they accept any and all journals that are on the face of this earth. So it's like going out to the beach on a Saturday night or a raging club, right? Everyone is going to be allowed on the beach, from the poorest to the richest. But the club in a 5-star hotel has a very exclusive elite crowd that they filter. So since a large number of non-medical related journals are integrated, so you can see Google Scholar as a beach where everyone is allowed. Uh, you would not find articles that are of the highest quality, right? So since there are a large number of non-medical related journals, your search words can result in non-medical results. However, because it's an easy interface, it helps people who are just starting out with research, people like us who are medical students. It helps you look through a lot of articles. And usually at our stage, if we're just trying to brush up on a topic, we look at the first 2, 3 results and understand what the current knowledge about it is. But although it gives you a lot of results, again, it makes your job harder because you have to realize whether the article you are looking at is right for you, right for your background research or not. So as I said, the onus is on the researcher to determine whether an article is useful to include in his background research or not. If you yourself are doing the study, you have to decide whether the article that I'm reading should be included in my background research, has relevant results, has good methodology, and whether it's important for me to include in my background research or to cite in my research article. Excuse me. So before you begin your search, it's important for you to define a few keywords by which you are going to search. For example, in a study involving stress and athletic performance, my keywords that I would possibly write down would be stress, athletic performance, students, college, sports, etc. Right? So when you have identified your research topic, or you have identified your research question, you should write down maybe 5 to 8 keywords related to your topic or question, with which you're going to search on Google Scholar, right? So this will help you prevent waste time by exploring 50 pages of research articles that are really not useful to you at all. So let's take an example. I've included a few of my keywords in an actual Google Scholar search. You can see that I've returned with about 160,000 results. I don't know if that's clearly visible to you guys. But I searched athletic performance, stress, and college. And I got about 159,000 results on Google Scholar. So for me, as an amateur researcher, it's going to be a Herculean task to sift through so many articles and determine whether they will be important in my background search or not. So I don't know if you guys can read this. I'm just going to zoom in here. You can see that the first 4 results are all incoherent and not related to the same topic at all. The first result says emotions and athletic performance. Second says it's a paper by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in Canada, where it just has nutrition and athletic performance The third is a risk profile for male college to use performing enhancing substances. Um, so it's not exactly what I'm looking for if I'm looking for stress and athletic performance, right? So I'm going to include another one of those keywords that I've written. So I included another keyword was sports, right? And this has cut down my search by more than 40,000 articles where it's not talking about nutrition, where it's talking about specific sports. So as you can see, the results are 1,11,000 now compared to 1,59,000 just by adding one more keyword, which is relevant to my background search, right? So this will prevent you from wasting a lot of time in this phase of research preparation. We'll talk more about how you can further narrow down your search towards the end. For now, let's understand what information we are getting along with our search results on this Google Scholar page, because it's slightly different from what you get on google.com or google.co.in. So this is a sample search result received on any Google Scholar search. As you can see, this is an example of something I've searched, and I've just zoomed that in for you guys. So the following information can be obtained at a glance from this result: the title of the research paper, the authors, the journal, the year, and a small description which includes your search words. So the number of citations that this article has received is also included in the search result. We talk about what citations are and how they're important to you. So this allows you to quickly evaluate whether this article is going to be of importance to you or not. So just in one search, just one result, you get the title of the article, who the authors are, if that's relevant to you, the journal that it's published in, the year of publishing. So usually, as a rule of thumb, we when we're looking at background research on a topic, we usually don't go back more than 5 or 10 years, depending on the topic. When we're doing this background research, because usually we have to have the most recent knowledge and the most recent information about a topic. So the rule of thumb is 5 to 10 years, in which you should not reference any article that's more than 5 to 10 years older. So that's why this year comes in handy. So yeah, this is the authors again. This is the journal name that you'll find in the search results. Is the year of publishing, again 5 to 10 years. So I would mostly not use this article if there are others available which I could reference instead of this. And this is the number of citations. We talk about what a citation is. It's essentially the number of times that a particular article has been quoted or mentioned in other published articles, right? It's essentially a measure of how popular the article is in a field that it covers. So I'm sure you guys are all aware of Instagram tagging, right? So what happens is when a person writes a research paper, if a person is making a statement, say the population of Maharashtra is 50 million, right? If that's a statement that someone's making, they have to back that up with where they got their information from, right? Like today, I can't sit and say the population of Bombay is 1,000 because there is evidence to prove that it's not. So whenever I'm making a statement of fact, I have to back that up with previous research that's been conducted, whether it's in the form of a review article, or original article, a case report, whatever it is. Any statement of fact that I'm making has to be backed up by this. So that's what I call referencing. So suppose I'm saying that knee replacement is the most common method used by orthopedic surgeons for arthritis of the knee. I have to back that up with a study that maybe has surveyed these orthopedic surgeons and saying, okay, yeah, if that's arthritis of knee, that's the most common surgery that we do, the most common implant that we use, right? So when they are citing someone, that's called citing someone, or referencing to someone, that's like tagging someone, right? So the number of times that a research paper has been tagged is the number of citations it has, right? That's the number of times that someone else in their paper has reference to this particular paper, right? So why this helps you and why it's important to understand is because it's usually the easiest way to determine the efficacy of the article right in the search results pane. Like I mentioned, the search result of each article is going to have a cited by 58 or cited by 45 number. So the more citations that an article has, the more reliable the article is. You can be rest assured that if an article has been cited more than 50 times, enough researchers have poured through the data in the article and ensure that everything is up to code. So although you should read the articles, always read the articles before referencing them, you don't need to go into the methodology of it and determine if it was extremely sound or not, unless there has been um, contention regarding that. But usually, if there has been more than about, I would say, around 30 to 40 citations on an article, you can be fairly rest assured that it's reliable, and you can cite it if it's relevant to your background search, right? So now that we've understood what our search results show us, let's move on to how better to filter out our search results. The first and easiest tool to use is the filter pane on the left of your search. So let me just zoom it in for you guys. This is the filter pane that you will see on the left of any Google Scholar search. It'll give you the options of filtering your results through years of study. So like I said, that the rule of thumb is that the articles usually should not be referenced more than 5 years or maximum 10 years. It's therefore a useful tool to set that cutoff date. However, if your research paper is on how surgeons would perform surgery in 1960s compared to today, it would not make sense to use articles which have just been published in the past 10 years. So then you can refer back to 1960. So it's a case-to-case basis of when you should or should not include articles more than 5 years. But if there is enough relevant information available, um, then you should only cite articles that are 5 to 10 years old. So this gives you you can select a custom range. You can select since 2019, 2020, whatever you want. If you want the most recent, say on COVID, because SARS epidemic also occurred earlier. So then if you want the most recent information on SARS-CoV-2, you'd search for maybe since 2020 or 2019 to get the most recent articles that would be important to you. So there's a neat feature in Google Scholar called Create Alert, and I'll help you guys understand what that is in a bit. But first, let's talk about the other options available in Google Scholar. So like I said, this is an example of a search result that you would get in Google Scholar. The name of the article is there, name of authors, name of journal, the year of journal, the year that the paper was published in that journal, which is 1998 here. A small abstract with all the bold words are the ones that I had searched for, and that's why it's showing me that. The first star that you see is save result to a library. So as you can imagine, if you're trying to determine what papers are important to you, you're not going to open one in a new tab, go back to that tab, save it, right? So if you think that this article may be important to me, you can just click on that star. It'll save your result to your library. And then in your own time, maybe you go through 15 articles a day or 20 articles a day to determine whether it's important to you or not. But this way you don't have to search again, and you might get different results if you miss out on a word or add a new word, etc. So this is a good, neat feature that Google Scholar has. Again, you have something called cite articles. So like I mentioned, citations, if you are not using a referencing tool like EndNote, etc., you can use this as cite article, and it'll give you the format in which one has to cite the article. We'll talk more about that. We're going to talk today about how to prepare your manuscript, etc. So we're going to talk more about how to cite articles and how to use references, etc. further. So again, the cited by information. So this article has been cited by 109 articles. So this gives me enough confidence in this article that, okay, the methodology is mostly sound. People have gone through it, and therefore I can use it in my background research. And it's not, as we say, an article that's maybe been published in a predatory journal or someone that hasn't done their due diligence in their methodology. So if you have on the right side of the article, if you have something that says PDF and it has a website written on there, this link is to read the full text of that article. So whenever this link is present, a free full text will be available to that article. So this is on Google Scholar. Whenever that link is present, a free full text will be available. So feel free to click on that, get a free full text in a PDF format, download it, use it for whatever you need. Another option in Google Scholar is something called My Profile and My Library. So once you save your results to your library, it'll appear in My Library. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So by far the most important button for us novice researchers is this related articles button, right? So let's be honest, keywords are never going to be perfect enough for a Google search algorithm. This button, however, allows us to forego our mistakes. Google has thousands of keywords with which it defines an article. And if you have found an article that perfectly meets your needs, so risk profile of male college athletes who use performing enhancing substances, if that's something that that I'm trying to determine what exactly makes people use performing enhancing substances, then this article would be perfect for me. So instead of writing my additional keywords, etc., I can just click on related articles and it would give me. So Google themselves, as you can imagine, have thousands of keywords with which it defines this particular article, right? And if you have found this article that perfectly meets your needs, Google is going to use, maybe not all, because that points to this particular one, but a lot of those keywords to see whether or not there are other matches related to this one, right? So if you have found the perfect article, click on related articles. These won't be all. These obviously won't be all the articles that would be maybe important to you, but they'll give you a huge sum or a large number of articles that would be important to you because of their keywords, right? So this won't cover all, but it'll cover usually a large chunk, which should be enough for your background research. So if, like, I had searched athletic performance stress college, I was met with 160,000 results, right? But if I clicked on that related articles button on the risk profile of male college athletes, I'm met with 101 results. So I can be, I will still have to sift through them, but I can be, I can rest happy that Google's keywords are met by with all of these studies, and therefore they would provide the highest yield of background information from me if I'm for me if I'm trying to get information about this topic, right? Uh, so so now I think we all have understood how Google Scholar works, what information we can get from it, how efficiently we can use it, right? So there is an option called advanced search in Google Scholar. If you just click on these three lines and move to advanced search, this is a dialog box that you are met with. And you can find articles with all of the words, with the exact phrase, with at least one of the words or without the words. So instead of using the word Boolean operator, which kind of freaks people out, Google has made life easy in their UI by saying with all of the words with the exact phrase. So I don't know if you guys remember in the 11th and 12th, we had those and or not gates that we did in physics. So this is exactly that. This is with all of the words means the and gate, in which essentially means that A and B should be present for the current to pass through, or instead of the current here, it would be for the search result to appear, right? So if A and B are present in an article, only as a keyword, only then only then this particular article will appear in our search results. With the exact phrase could possibly mean, say, college athletes and not just college and athletes, because that would open you up to a huge number of additional articles. At least one of the words acts like your or gate, in which if either A or B is present, then the article will appear in your search result. So if I have, say, men and women, or at least one of them who are, at least one of the words should be there in the article for it to appear in my search result. So if I have college or high school, um, either college students or high school students, both will appear in my search results, right? So it will give you the most number of results, the or gate. And without the words means that if I don't want, say, I don't want university students, then I would say without the words university, right? So I would only want college students who are 11th, 12th, and I won't want any university students that are there. So that's essentially the meaning of the and or not gate, and what Boolean operators stand for and why they're used during our search process. So like I said, that Google allows you to keep up to date with any search results that you have set up an alert for. It keeps you in touch with advances that are happening in the area of your search. So if you set up an alert for particular keywords, uh, Google will send you an email and alert you that, hey, this is a new article that's available. If you had searched for these particular keywords, if you had searched for them today versus 1 week ago, the additional articles would be available to you. And it's kind of a neat feature if you are trying to keep up with, say, um, developments in ECG technology or whatever you guys are up to. But it's kind of a neat feature. I think you should check it out. Um, Again, the My Library feature is if you hit on the star on a Google Scholar result, it'll add it to My Library. You go to My Library on the home page, it'll give you a list-wise result, a list-wise amalgamation of whatever you have added to your library. So it makes your life easier to just sift through them, remove them from library if you don't want them, instead of you having to copy paste on a Word document or having to save them in a folder on your computer, right? So congratulations, you have enough knowledge now of G-Scholar to perform your own searches. Yes, this is preliminary knowledge, and yes, you have uh, not not done enough to start a marketing company where you can say, okay, so we get your result to the top if these keywords are searched. But you are an expert at G-Scholar in your own way. You should definitely use it before your next research project, even if you're not performing a research, if you want to keep updated with any of the particular topics that you want. Um, you should definitely use it, and now you can. So if you guys have any questions about G Scholar, now would be the time to ask them, so that because you wouldn't be a true researcher if you didn't know how to use the upcoming database, which is PubMed. So if you guys have any questions about Google Scholar, I'd love to answer them now. Okay, seeing none. Um, I think let's start learning about PubMed then, the most organized, sought after, and scary database for amateur researchers. It is miles away from Google Scholar, both in terms of searching parameters as well as the results that you receive. So the first benefit of PubMed is that it is limited to only medical sciences and its affiliates. There is no chance of running into articles from other disciplines. However, you will have physiotherapy, you will have occupational therapy, you will have paramedical branches associated with PubMed, but you won't run into, say, engineering or law or commerce, etc. papers. So it's for biomedical research only. So that itself decreases the amount of search results uh, that you will need to sift through. So if my article is published on Google Scholar, that means I can't publish on PubMed. So your article is published in a journal. That journal can be indexed in PubMed and Google Scholar. So you don't have to yourself publish an article as such, because it will be published in a journal, which will have arrangements with PubMed or Google Scholar to have it indexed on their website. But I think I'll just go through it once again at the end of this lecture about how exactly that works. So let's move on to PubMed now. And another advantage of PubMed is that it's the most sought after database for journal. It has a very stringent protocol and requirements for including journals in the search results. Therefore, the journals, and by extension, the articles in PubMed, are already pre-vetted by professionals. So you can rest your mind at ease for any of these articles for your search requirements. So how indexing works is you have your article, okay? You want to publish it in a journal. Consider that journal is Indian Journal of Orthopedics, right? So Indian Journal of Orthopedics can be indexed in multiple such databases. So it can be indexed in Scopus, Index Copernicus, Google Scholar. IJO is incidentally also indexed in PubMed, right? So if anyone searches on any of these databases, they will find that journal, right? And these databases have specific keywords with which they associate your article. So your article you publish to the journal has, the database has then seen that, okay, there's a new article published here. these are the keywords that we will associate with it, and that's how it appears in their search results, right? I think that's quite clear. So why PubMed is famous and why PubMed is the most used is because whenever we perform our background research as researchers, we use PubMed to search for articles because um, unlike Google Scholar, which wants the most results, which is their main aim, PubMed is more focused on quality of research, right? So they accept journals only if their committee decides that this journal has a strong or a very stringent enough policy to accept articles, right? They are not accepting articles that don't have sound methodology or don't are concluding something that's completely ridiculous, right? So they decide whether or not a journal has to be included in their search database. But with Google Scholar, that's not the case. Google Scholar will accept any and every article, right? So let's understand how we got PubMed. So essentially, the National Library of Medicine, which is in the US, they started indexing all biomedical literature that was available in 1879. Okay. At that time, obviously, no computers were available. They made this list of this literature, basically a data set in a physical form, which was called Index Medicus, right? So now, as soon as the computer age came, they decided to make an online database called Medline. And in 1996, they decided to give free access to this Medline database from an online search portal called PubMed. So um, Medline is essentially the database that they have, and PubMed is a way to search within Medline, right? So sometimes you will find some journals are indexed in PubMed, but not in Medline, but never vice versa, right? So PubMed also will have some journals that are not listed in Medline, but that's not the case vice versa. So just to throw some numbers at you, PubMed has over 30 million articles and more than 5,200 journals. So although it is much smaller than Google Scholar in terms of sheer number, you will have to still sift through articles and you will have to realize whether this article is important enough or not. However, the importance of realizing whether the methodology is sound is comparatively lesser here. I wouldn't say zero, but it's comparatively lesser here than Google Scholar, right? So this is the PubMed website that you will meet once you go to pubmed.ncbi. And this is the new sort of PubMed that they have, PubMed UI that they have come up with. Here you will see on the bottom, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but on the bottom right, you will see something called journals. So that's where you can search for journals with different areas of expertise, etc. But you have to still see whether or not they're indexed in Medline or PubMed. We can go through that at the end of this lecture, and I'll tell you exactly how to do that. But this is the PubMed interface that you will be met with once you go online. But before we can move on to learning exactly how to search in PubMed, we need to spend a little time learning about the mesh vocabulary. It is the basis of how articles are indexed in PubMed database. And therefore, it becomes very important to understand the mesh system to perform a focused search on PubMed, right? Mesh, although sounds daunting, it sounds like something out of an AI movie. It's essentially stands for a simple term. It's medical subject headings, and which they have shrunk to mesh. And they're basically 10 to 15 keywords that are assigned to each article in the PubMed database by special indexers. So these keywords provide a wholesome view of the whole article, and the search terms lead the researchers to articles of interest. So what PubMed or what Medline or what Index Medicus has been doing from the start is if they receive an article, they will send it to people who are called indexers, right? And they will go through the whole article and they will assign specific words to them, which would then be your 10 to 15 keywords, right? But they don't have unlimited words because then what if you use synonyms, right? What if you use death rate instead of mortality rate, etc., right? So they have a specific database of words that they can use when they're assigning these keywords to these articles, right? So PubMed sends articles in whatever journals they have associated with them to special indexers, okay? These indexers sit and read the article. After reading the article, after understanding the article, they will assign 10 to 15 keywords to that article. So if you search for anything on the PubMed database using any one of those words, this article is going to pop up in your search results. Okay, so that's what medical subject headings or MESH stands for. And it's basically used to categorize these articles so that there has to be some way of realizing what to search for and what articles to get, right? So this is the way that they do it. So MESH has its own website. If you can see the MESH database on the bottom right, it says just above journal, it says MESH database. So you can go to it through that, or you can go to meshb.nlm. I don't know the exact address, but this is the MESH database homepage, and there you'll be met with a number of options that we break down right now. So it's hosted on the same database as PubMed. And before we search on this database, it's a little important to understand what MESH exactly is and how it is structured, right? So there are essentially 4 types of MESH words: headings, subheadings, publication types, and something called SCR. So we just need to focus on the first 2, headings and subheadings, right? They can be, so subheadings are specifiers for headings, which means that they can be common among your different headings. So headings are essentially biomedical concepts, say your hypertension or diabetes mellitus, or say typhoid, right? They are biomedical concepts. And the subheadings are something that explains or goes into the depth of that concept. So if you say etiology means causative factors. So if the main heading is typhoid, it would have a subheading called etiology. So if some paper is talking about salmonella, then it would be indexed in PubMed as typhoid and etiology, right? I hope that's clear. So as you can see, there are, in these MESH headings, it's a list of 13 main branch headings of the MESH system. Each heading can be further divided into more specific headings. This is like a tree system. So this is an example of the tree structure of the MESH system. Note that each word in this image is itself a heading, and only different between the higher branches and the lower branches is the specificity of the word. So for example, if your study was based on the effect on the eye of corticosteroid therapy or steroid therapy, you can see that either you can use the more specific word eyelashes, or you could just select the heading eye, which would default include eyebrows, eyelids, and eyelashes, right? So if the indexer has said, okay, if you've done, if you have performed a study and you've published it in a great journal about the effect of corticosteroids on eyelashes, right? So eyelashes, the indexer would possibly include eyelashes as a main subject heading when they are indexing for PubMed, right? But if someone searches for eye, they will be met with the results of all articles which include eyebrows, eyelids, and eyelashes as well, right? So I hope that's easy to understand. This is basically the tree structure that's there. So the higher structure includes all the other branches with it, right? So same, so the other MESH categories include eye, which includes anterior capsule of lens, anterior segment of eye, anterior chamber, etc. So the higher branch would include the lower branches. This is essentially what a MESH tree structure is. So now that you've understood what this structure is, if I want to continue my study on athlete performance and stress, I can search and see. So if I am conducting that study on, again, let's take the same topic, athlete performance and stress, I can search and see whether athlete is an actual heading or not, whether athlete is a word that instead of sportsmen or instead of weightlifters, etc., that multiple synonyms available. So if athlete is a word that these indexers use to identify articles, right? So I go on the MESH website, I select this main heading descriptor terms, and I type in athletes, and all right, great. Athlete is actually a word that they use, so I can have it as part of my keywords when I'm searching in PubMed. So just to be sure that the MESH term is the same as what you mean, they have provided something called a scope note, which essentially defines the word that you have searched, right? To make sure that the definition you are looking for meets with theirs. So although athletes could not mean multiple things, it could be particularly useful in more complex terms, right? So now when I searched for stress in the main heading terms, it said it had no results. This means that stress is not a word by which PubMed articles are indexed, and therefore I should not be ideally using it. So if you can see at the bottom, I've searched for stress here. And if you guys can see at the bottom, it says no results for stress in main headings terms, right? So stress is not a keyword that I can use when I'm searching on PubMed. So I think about what other terms are related to stress, what other synonyms could I possibly have, and I came up with anxiety. Right, we could possibly use anxiety uh, as a substitute for stress, which I thought was the next best substitute for stress. Which means that articles are indexed using this word. This will allow me to more specifically search for articles in PubMed, right? So instead of using stress, which I would have if I didn't know that this mesh existed, I'll now search with anxiety. It'll give me access to more results and more specific results to what I'm searching for, right? So I think the topic of mesh headings is quite clear by now. Let's move on to the subheadings or the specifiers of these headings. Like I said, the etiology of typhoid, or the diagnosis of typhoid, or the therapeutics in typhoid, etc. So the etiology, diagnosis, therapeutics would be subheadings, which essentially define your main heading, right? So they can be used in addition with headings to narrow topics. So if your headings again is measles, the subheading could be epidemiology, therapy, etiology, diagnosis. There's usually a ton of subheadings that are associated with it. So once you have selected your heading, you can view the subheadings that are used with that heading. So how to see these subheadings? So obviously, if you have, you won't have, say, so you obviously have specific qualifiers or specific subheadings associated with a particular heading that you can use, that the indexers at PubMed use, right? So in this, so once you reach a particular heading that you want, so in this case, I've used this heading called gastroparesis, which is essentially paralysis of the stomach. Um, we can go and click on qualifiers, and then you can view all the subheadings associated with that heading. So I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me just zoom it in for you. So these are all the qualifiers for the heading of gastroparesis, which is blood, CSF, chemically induced classification, etc., which can be used along with gastroparesis to get you a more specific result depending on what you are looking for, right? So I think that makes the topic of headings and subheadings quite clear. And but why are we learning this? That's probably the question popping in your head right now. Why are we learning all about this? So since all articles are indexed in a PubMed database, using these words, knowing what words to use makes your search very specific and limited to articles of interest to you, right? As I said, there are more than 30 million articles in PubMed, and it's very important to limit your search, or you will go mad just trying to sift through the extra articles that are completely useless to you. So when searching in PubMed, it's best to use mesh terms. So for example, instead of searching for bladder inflammation, which is not a mesh term, searching for cystitis, which is a mesh term, would yield more accurate and wholesome results. So, and again, then searching for cystitis with the subheading of treatment will yield results of only articles that talk about the treatment of cystitis. So this is a sample search that I had conducted. If I had searched PubMed database for bladder inflammation, which is not a mesh term, I would get 16,500 results. And if I search for cystitis, I would get only 14,000. So just a simple change in the word has cut down on 15% of the results that I would have been absolutely no use to me, right? So this is why mesh terms are used and why mesh terms are important to understand. It's very easy to search on mesh. You can just go on that website, search for whatever term you're looking for. If you don't find it, think of synonyms associated to it, search if that's there, identify a qualifier, and then you can start searching with PubMed. So for example, so how to search in the PubMed database using this newfound knowledge of mesh is if you have just one subheading, an easy way to move on to searching is simply typing out your heading, putting a slash, and typing out your subheading without any spaces, right? So if you guys see what I have done here, my heading is gastroparesis, uh, and I'm basically interested in the diagnosis of gastroparesis, and that's why I put a slash, no spaces on either, and I have put diagnosis, right? So PubMed automatically knows if I'm using the slash without any spaces between two words that I'm referring to mesh headings and mesh subject headings, and it'll appropriately alter its algorithm to give me results that I am looking for. Okay. Great. So so this is just another example of why using mesh terms is important. I have used gastroparesis space diagnosis, right? So since I have not included that backslash there between the words, PubMed does not know whether PubMed does not know that I know the mesh terms, and therefore it has not included that in its algorithm. So if I just search for gastroparesis and diagnosis, I come up with 1,706 results, right? But if I let PubMed know that I know exactly what mesh terms are, and I put a backslash between the words without any space, I come up with 543 results. So from 1,700, I've gone down to 543. So it has removed almost 68% of the articles, which in the initial search would have been completely useless to me, right? I know for a fact that these 543 articles will include information about the diagnosis of gastroparesis, and for the most part, nothing else, right? So that's why we use headings and subheadings, because it cuts down our um, our search results, and we can focus on what we really need to, which is evaluate the articles that are important to us. So if you want to make your heading more specific, uh, we may come up with a word and it's wow, you find it as a mesh heading, and but the intelligent indexers at NCBI may have come up with more focal words to define what you're trying to search. So to determine whether our header is the most specific for our research, whether it's absolutely appropriate, we can go to an option in the search results called mesh tree structures. So again, I explained the tree structure system to you, so we can determine if there is any specific header which is more specific than phototherapy. So consider I am doing a study to determine the efficacy of blue light, which is the UV phototherapy that we have for neonatal jaundice. I have decided that my header is phototherapy. I search on the Mesh website, and I find that phototherapy exists as a medical subject heading, and I'm very happy, right? However, I want to know if there are any more specific headers that I can use to refine my search. So I click on this mesh tree structures tab, and I see that yes, the intelligent indexers have in fact further divided phototherapy header into 6 headers, and the last one, UV therapy, is a more focal definition for my research, and therefore I choose to use that. So if I had just searched for phototherapy, I would have come up with results that included color therapy, heliotherapy, low level light therapy, photochemotherapy, etc. But if I replace this phototherapy that I was about to use by clicking on the mesh tree structure, I see that there are more specific headings that are available. And I choose ultraviolet therapy. Now you see this plus sign, there are more specific headings available to ultraviolet therapy as well. But just to make you understand, I would rather use ultraviolet therapy than phototherapy. So I'm missing out, or I'm avoiding these articles of photochemotherapy, intense pulse light therapy, which would add unnecessary bulk to my results, right? So we have gotten through the major part of mesh and why that's important. If you and we move on to searching on PubMed. So if you guys have any questions so far, I'll be happy to answer them. I'll give you guys maybe a 5-minute break or a 2-minute break before we move on to actually searching on PubMed. And meanwhile, I can answer any questions you guys have.
So there was one question, sir.
Mhm.
Do PubMed include journals from any nation or only from USA?
So PubMed has journals from all over the world. Like I said, the Indian Journal of Orthopedics is included in PubMed. So is Journal of Turkish Neurosurgery. And you find multitude others, Chinese, Hong Kong, whatever it is. that PubMed includes journals from all countries. Any other questions so far?
There were some questions, but those are not related to PubMed.
Okay, no, then I think we'll avoid them for now.
Okay. Okay.
So if I include a doc in my reference column of research paper, is that included in citation of that paper? I'm not particularly understanding exactly what that question means. Okay, you want to repeat about qualifiers? So I'll just quickly do that. So like I said, gastroparesis is the main subject heading. But I'm not always going to search about gastroparesis, right? My research is maybe related to diagnosis of this particular disease, or diagnosis of typhoid, or therapeutics of typhoid, or the cause of typhoid, or how typhoid is spread in this country, which would be epidemiology of typhoid. So that's where the qualifiers come in. Once you have a heading, there are specific subheadings associated with that. So in this case, is gastroparesis, which is essentially say paralysis of stomach. So, but if you want a simpler example, let's consider it as infection of stomach, gastritis. Here you will find a number of qualifiers. So if I just zoom in here, you can see that it has blood, CSF, diagnosis, diagnostic imaging, diet therapy, drug therapy, etc. So these are all the specific headings that are used with gastroparesis, with which articles are indexed, right? So if an article is talking about using OGD scopy to diagnose gastroparesis, it would be included in um, gastroparesis / diagnosis, right? If they're talking about a particular drug that helps treat this, it would be gastroparesis / therapeutics, right? So that's the point of subheadings and why you need to identify the subheadings associated with your main heading. No, all journals associated with PubMed are not free to access. There's something called the PMC. I forgot the full form, but all those. So that's a collection of PubMed indexed journals that are free to access. So you can definitely go on that and search for the journals there. They also use mesh terms. It's hosted on the same National Library of Medicine website. Um, so last two types of mesh vocabulary are really not important to you because it's essentially article types and supplementary concept records. Supplementary concept records just basically used for indexers, not for you. Even I don't have too much experience with those. But the first two are the only ones that you will need to search for on PubMed. All right. So I think that answers most of the questions. I think we can move on to how to actually search on PubMed now. Uh, so, like I said, we have to be specific. Like in the Google Scholar search, the more terms you enter, the narrower your search will be, and the fewer irrelevant results you will find. You don't need to use any punctuations, no question marks on whether this is related to that question mark, no full stops, or no commas, etc. Um, PubMed will find phrases for you. So if you are looking for college athletes, PubMed will realize that college athletes is a phrase, and it will add that in its algorithm. And in the general PubMed search bar, you don't need to use any operators, for example, and because PubMed will already automatically add and between your concepts unless you use the advanced search, which we move on to now in a bit. Um, you will not need to use and like you would have in Google Scholar, right? And you don't need to use tags. So if your search term, for example, is if you're looking for a paper done by Dr. Agrawal relating to gastric cancer, you don't need to put author Agrawal, journal IMJ, title searching for gastric cancer. You can directly write Agrawal IMJ searching for gastric cancer, and PubMed already can understand whether this is an author that they are referring to, or is this a journal that they're referring to, and they will make modifications in their algorithm accordingly. So you don't need to worry about that when you search on PubMed, right? So when you do get your search results like Google Scholar, there is a filter your results option available where you can where you can select whether there is a free full text available for those who are asking who need free access. Right in your search results on the left, you will see text available, free full text. So that means that the whole article is available to you for you to read free of cost. So you can just click on that, and only the articles which have a free full text will appear in your search results. Oops. Right. And then it has also article types that we discussed yesterday. So if you're looking for the highest evidence, if you have a patient in front of you who you're treating and you want to look at the highest evidence possible, so you would select meta-analysis or RCTs or systematic reviews. So that's an option that you have for yourself. There are something called additional filters that are available. So the additional filters option essentially allows you to, again, select specific article types, whether it's a lecture or a clinical trial in phase 1, 2, 3, clinical conference, etc. And you can select particular journals, etc. So I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go into depths of this. But yeah, that's the additional options available that you have in your search results. So now you're qualified. Once you've learned mesh vocabulary, you're qualified to use the advanced method of PubMed search. If you go on the PubMed website, it'll be right below the search bar. It says advanced. And this is sort of the dialog box that will come up. So when you want to add terms to the query box is essentially a list of terms that you will use, that you will put into PubMed, and it'll spit out some result, right? So if you want to add terms to the query box, you go to all fields drop down, and you will select mesh major topic here. So you will come up with a list of results, author, book, etc. And you can just select mesh major topic or subheading. So if consider I'm doing a study on hypertension and its association with, say, brain cancer, right? Just randomly. So I would select the mesh major topic. I would go to mesh, make sure all my keywords are mesh headings. Hypertension is a mesh heading. So I would select mesh major topic, type in hypertension, and then it'd give me the option of add with and, add with or, add with not. So again, and or not are your simple Boolean operators, where and results only which have both word A and word B, or will have either word A or B, and not will word A but not word B. So this is just to hone down that topic. So if you're searching for salmonella and hamburger, you will find only results which are present, which have salmonella and hamburger with them. So if you just search for salmonella, you'll find 64,000, hamburger 2,500. But if only 12 of those studies will have salmonella and hamburger, this is just an example. It's not actual PubMed search. This is the and Boolean operator. The or Boolean operator will give you the largest number of results. So if you're searching for something that's rare, say a particular brain tumor or a genetic disease, you want to search with the or Boolean operator, where you'll find results from all things, whether hockey, soccer, football, consider. So you'll find results that are hockey, that are football, that are soccer, that are hockey and soccer, that are hockey and football, football and etc. So you understand that or will essentially give you the largest number of results. Not, on the other hand, will retrieve a set from which articles do not have that term. So if you have letter and arthritis, right? It will and you are saying that I want arthritis, not letter. So it will exclude all articles that have the word letter in them. So even if an article has arthritis and letter, those articles would be excluded. So if there's someone's talking about writing a letter and developing arthritis, that would not appear in your search results if you've said not letter, because you don't want the word letter at all in the articles of your search result, right? So there's something called nesting, in which multiple Boolean operators in PubMed can be processed from left to right. So these will retrieve the records that include both. So if you have salmonella and hamburger or eggs, so you will get results that include salmonella and hamburger, as well as all records with the term eggs, whether or not they contain the other two terms. So if you see this sort of Venn diagram that's present here, you search for salmonella and hamburger or eggs. So the whole egg circle is opaque or colored because it'll include all articles with the word egg, but only those which include salmonella and hamburger together and not individually, right? Um, so yeah, so again, uh, this is the example of nesting that you can do as your search results become more and more search queries become more and more complicated. Um, so let's go back to the example of my brain neoplasms and hypertension, whether or not they're related. So I have already included hypertension and I'm going to add brain neoplasm with an and. This seems to be blocked by something, but I want to add it with an and because I'm searching for articles that have talked about the association of a brain neoplasm and hypertension, right? So I go to the brain neoplasm mesh vocabulary and I go to the tree structure that's present. I see that there are, as I would expect, other more specific headings to brain tumors. So if I'm searching for articles about brain neoplasm, but I don't want to include, say, pinealomas um, or say even intratentorial neoplasms, I would add them with a not. So if I want to search for hypertension and brain neoplasm, but I don't want to include articles that have studied about pinealomas and hypertension, etc. I would add it with a not. So this would be my final query: hypertension and brain neoplasm, not pinealomas. Right. So I would get results that have hypertension and brain neoplasms as their major topics in their keywords, but I would exclude all results that have pinealomas. Okay. So now that you've completely understood PubMed and essentially are able to use these mesh terms, you finally found a paper. Oops, you need to pay to access. What are some alternatives that you can use? Um, First step I would request you all to do is ask your college librarian if she has access to some publishers. I personally was from a government college in Mumbai, and I myself didn't know that my school actually had access to a lot of Ovid journals and the BMJ as well. I found that out in the last year of my MBBS there. But you should definitely ask your college librarian if they have access, because usually I think it's a requirement by MCI that you have access to a few at least. So you should definitely do that first. Like I said, ResearchGate, I was talking about it yesterday. It's a great tool for you to get in touch with researchers. If you find an article on PubMed that's paid, you can search for it on ResearchGate and you can request for a free full text from the author. Usually, I have myself done that a couple of times and they have been quite helpful. So you can definitely try to do that. Unpaywall.org is an extension for your Chrome browser. It's a completely legal extension. I don't know exactly how that works, but Unpaywall is an extension you can use for your Chrome where you can go to a website that has that pay page and it will try to figure stuff out for you. Or you can search for alternate research papers on an open access website. So open access basically means that, see, journals are publishing for money, right? That's what they do. So either a, an article, either an author has submitted something to a journal, they publish it, and someone pays to access that article, or the author pays that money up front. Usually the fee is about $2,500 in leading journals, and the article is available to all for free. So you may ask, why does the author want to pay $2,500? It's because open access, as you could imagine, is read by more people because they don't want to pay for research articles. So that's the meaning of open access. So there are some open access journals that are available. Um, Most of the journals listed on the NMC, the PMC are open access, and you can access all free full text from there. Um, so yeah, these are the alternatives you can do. There are some illegal resources which have come to use for a lot of people in India. I personally don't condone using them. It's the Sci-Hub and LibGen are two websites that are available. But they are illegal, and therefore it is unfair to publishers because they themselves are also paying high fees for their websites, etc. But they are available, and you can use them at your own risk. Yeah, so there is an article, a web article, a blog article that talks about these alternate resources. If you guys want to take a screenshot of this QR code and scan it somehow, you can get access to that article, and you can get a hoard of information about where to access articles that are paid, right? So I think that concludes our PubMed searching and PubMed related information that we were to cover today. Uh, so if you guys have any questions now, I'd love to answer them.
There have been a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, are these headings and subheadings case sensitive?
These subheadings are not case sensitive, no.
Okay. Does this search engine only consider the abstract or the entire research paper?
No. So although you just have access to the abstract, the indexers have read the entire paper, and they have determined these 10 to 15 research words, 10 to 15 indexed words, or these mesh terms that they want to assign to that paper. And that's how they've assigned it. So it's not necessary that the word hypertension would be included in the paper, but if they've included the word high BP, then the indexers would realize that it means the same thing. And because hypertension is a mesh word, they would use that to identify that particular article.
Um, During background research, what if we miss some journals, paid ones? Does that affect our research?
Um, I spoke about it. I mean, it depends on, see, if you're doing background research where you're just trying to determine um, whether or not, whether when you're trying to get a basic idea of what this topic is, what the current knowledge is, it becomes important for you to access a few paid articles, because unlike COVID, where they made everything free and you can access all COVID related information for free, it does become important for you to at least view a few, because if you just depend on open access journals, you might be missing on a few points. And therefore, yeah, but that's, I gave a lot of alternatives on what you can do. You can contact your library, you can request the author on ResearchGate on your own will. If you want to use some illegal methods, that you can do that as well. But yeah, that's what you can do. And I would recommend you to definitely look at a few articles and determine whether they're useful to you or not before just signing off on them because they're paid.
What is the difference between qualifiers and tree structures? Because both gives us head
Okay,
subheadings.
so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you guys an example of how that works, right? Can you guys give me a word so that life becomes easy? Just give me a word, and
Diabetes.
IMA team. Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Let's see. What is that? Perfect. So, okay, this is not the updated mesh website. Okay, so I go on the PubMed website. I go on mesh database. Yeah, bringing me to this. So then I just want to search for. Let me just go to the mesh. Why is it being negative? Anyways, yeah. Oops. Okay, let's do this. So if I search for, say, diabetes, it's going to give me a result of what the mesh headings are, right? So diabetes mellitus is, they've given you the explanation here, but this is a different UI than I'm used to. Just give me 2 minutes. Perfect. I found that updated website. So you said diabetes, right? So if I search, I'm writing diabetes, I'm writing main heading descriptor term, and I'm searching for it. So diabetes is actually not a mesh major term that they have used. So maybe I type mellitus. Diabetes mellitus is, right? So that's how mesh works. Where if I just type diabetes, it's not like Google where it give me 50 options that include diabetes. I have to be a little more specific, right? So diabetes mellitus is a mesh descriptor. It's a mesh heading, right? So now if I want to see that there are other headings which are more specific than diabetes mellitus, I go to the mesh tree structure where I have, as you can see, the sort of different types of diabetes, where it's type 1, type 2, gestational. If I want to talk about diabetic ketoacidosis, so these themselves are headings. These are not subheadings, right? So if I go to type 1 diabetes, this itself has a more specific heading called Wolfram syndrome. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in type 1 diabetes itself. So that's how I can use the mesh tree structure to make my search more specific. Then I go to qualifiers, right? If I'm talking about a new age method, like the new Apple Watch might come with a monitor for glucose, right? If I'm talking about the diagnosis of diabetes mellitus type 1, this is my allowable qualifier, which is diagnosis, right? So I would go on the PubMed website. I would search for diabetes mellitus diagnosis, right? And I would get these results, right? So obviously, I'm expecting a lot of results because it's a fairly common disease, and there are a lot of research being done on that. Uh, but that's essentially how I would start. So if I could just give you an example of why this mesh term works, is so if you can see diabetes mellitus / diagnosis, I'm letting PubMed know that I have a mesh term, right? That I know mesh, and that's how I search for it. So I'm getting 47,300 results. But if I just remove this backslash, I'm getting 251,000 results, right? So that's how mesh becomes important. This is just one example of the mesh heading and subheading that I've used, but that's essentially how someone would go about using it, right? Okay, I think that's good. Any other questions?
Actually, can you just go back? Like, so there was one question that in the last slide of phototherapy, there are some numbers in the brackets. What are they for? I think that's related to the
Let
subheadings.
me
There's a
see.
number in the brackets.
Oh, that you don't need to worry about. That's just a specific number assigned to them. It's like an ICD code, right? That's just a number assigned to them so that it's easier for them to identify that. But that's not something that you need to worry about.
I think that's it. These
That's
were
it.
the
All
questions.
right.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now let's move on to how to gather, manage, and store data. Let's do that. Okay, perfect. Right. Um, so now that you understood, we've conducted our basic research. We are done with searching on PubMed. We have identified articles um, that are important to us. Um, we can now move on to gathering, managing, and storing our data, right? But before you start, uh, to, before we move on to the methods and ways that you can gather data, it's important to take care of a few things first. Like I had mentioned earlier, this is a medical research study and not a marketing campaign for a country or a company, right? There are a few guidelines that you are expected to follow, and that's how you differentiate yourself from a marketing survey to a biomedical survey, right? First, so a lot of people have confusion about study population, target population, and population. I know this is kind of a PSM topic, but I'll make your life easier for future use as well. Uh, the You have to identify your study population, the people who you are going to ask your questions to, or you're going to say measure level of CRP, or measure level of ESR, or measure the hemoglobin, etc. So you have to identify your study population, right? But before that, you have to see the total population. So total population refers to people with at least one common characteristic, right? So for example, people living in Mumbai, or people living in Telangana, people living in India, people living in Hyderabad, people in a small area of Hyderabad, etc. Or even say students attending a particular hospital. That would be your total population. The target population is a subset of that total population about which you intend to draw conclusion. So if I'm talking about medical students in India, right, that's my total population. And if my target population, my target population, so if I'm talking about students in India, right, that would be my total population. But my target population would be medical students if I'm talking about depression in medical students, right? So, for example, if you're studying about the effect of beta blockers on hypertension in people living in India, your total population would be people living in India, right? But your target population would be people affected with hypertension who are living in India, right? Your study population would be a subset of that target population, which would be those people that actually you are measuring their BP in, correct? So it's important to identify your target population. So, like I said, if you're talking about therapeutics or diagnosis of diabetes mellitus, your target population would be, say, age 30 to 40 in who are suffering from diabetes, right? So you have to identify your target population, which is a subset of the total population. Now, in this target population, if you're talking about people suffering from diabetes in India, right, if you're trying to make that generalized statement, you cannot possibly have or even try to include all people who are suffering from diabetes in India in your study, right? So that's why you have a representative sample called a study population, which is essentially uh, your sample size, correct? So we talk about sample size and we talk about statistics, but this is this is essentially how we move on from population to study population, right? Uh, so this is not a social commentary on racism. This picture is just trying to tell you about inclusion and exclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria is a list of characteristics that a person would have to meet for becoming a part of the study, right? Inclusion criteria are essentially features of the target population that the researchers will use to answer their research. Okay, this could be demographic, clinical, geographic characteristics. Okay, so you are trying to say, okay, I will only include people who are above 30 in my diabetes study, or below 60, or below 80, etc. So that would be one of your inclusion criteria. So you have to with every paper you have to determine who you are including, why you are including them, who you are excluding, and why you are excluding them, right? So that your so that your so that if someone's reading your paper, and if a patient is sitting in front of them, uh, and they will be able to analyze whether your paper is applicable to that patient or not, whether your target population meets their target population, right? So exclusion criteria are essentially features of study participants who meet the inclusion criteria, but have additional features which is skew results of the study. So if you have someone who has diabetes from who is between 30 and 40 as your inclusion criteria, you would exclude people who have an insulinoma or basically a tumor that would or a pancreatic tumor that decreases their insulin production, right? So once you have included people, you have to exclude people based on certain characteristics based on your study. So that's exactly what inclusion and exclusion criteria are. The best way to learn these criteria is to read papers, read what other people have done in their inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, for example, on the same study that we spoke about, the effect of beta blockers on Indian adults with essential hypertension, right? That's a very broad study, I understand, but basically effect of their blood pressure of beta blockers on Indian adults with essential hypertension. My inclusion criteria would be Indians living in India, right? Because I'm not going to go abroad and seek Indians there and try to get them part of the study. Inclusion criteria is someone who is Indian living in India, because there could be environmental factors at play. So if a patient comes to me from Dubai who is Indian, and comes to me, I will not ask him to be part of this study because he is not an Indian living in India, right? So my inclusion criteria would be that it would be hypertension should be present at least since 1 year. So it's, it's essential hypertension if you can't find any other pathophysiology associated with it. That it's not just a short term, stress induced sort of the work is bad, you have hypertension. Um, so this is just an example of an inclusion criteria that you would use. So essentially how research works in the real world is you are a doctor, a patient comes, sits in front of you, right? You have a study going on. You're trying to determine whether this patient can be included in that study or not, right? So you yourself have listed out inclusion criteria in your study protocol that you will then submit to ethics committee, etc. And these are essentially to determine whether the person sitting across from you, the patient that's sitting across from you, should be included in your study or not, right? And then you can have your age criteria more than 40, less than 60, because if it's child, it may not be essential hypertension, etc. Right? So now this person sitting across from you is a 55-year-old gentleman who's living in Hyderabad and who has hypertension since 5 years. You say, okay, I'm going to include him, right? He can be part of my study. Now, once you have provisionally included him, you have to check these boxes on whether this person has these conditions or not. If he does, then he has to be excluded from the study, right? So if once you have decided that, okay, this person can be part of my study, right? You need to find whether he has any secondary hypertension, which means that it's because of maybe hyperthyroidism or because of his adrenal gland functioning, etc. And you want to exclude if he has missed dose of beta blocker for more than 2 days. And obviously, every paper has to have this exclusion criteria of refusal to give consent. And if that person is suffering from any congenital heart diseases, you may want to exclude them just on humanitarian grounds because beta blockers might not be good for them. So etc. So that's how, if a person is sitting in front of you, you need to determine whether I'm going to include this person. And once you've included him, does he have certain features which would affect my results in a negative or positive way, whatever it is? If he does, I'm going to not make him part of the study, right? So an example of a particular study that was conducted published in Latin American countries was, the title of the study was a cross-sectional, which essentially means in a particular time where they have not gone back or gone forward. It's cross-sectional means at a particular time. Multi-center study, which means they've taken multiple hospitals in and around an area. Evaluated self-reported adherence. It basically means that the patient themselves reported on whether or not they took their inhaled therapies among patients with COPD in Latin America, right? So this is the article they came up with, and this is their exclusion criteria. So if a person is sitting in front of me, if he's an adult more than 40 years of age, diagnosed with COPD for more than 1 year, some specific respiratory or spirometry related information that they want, that the background research suggests could affect their results. So they want to exclude those people. So they have said at least one spirometry in the last year with a post bronchodilator FEV1, FVC for less than 0.7. So so if a person does not have this at least one spirometry result, they would not include that person, right? And former or current smokers, they needed to be former or current smokers to be included in the study, and they needed to have stable disease to be included. But if they had a diagnosis of sleep apnea or any acute or chronic condition that would limit the ability to participate in the study, or any refusal to give informed consent, then they would be excluded, right? So a person sitting in front of you, he meets all this criteria, you ask him, so would you be part of the study? And he refuses to give informed consent, you'd exclude him, right? So that's essentially what inclusion and exclusion criteria are, and that's how they are used in studies. So to define your population for inclusion exclusion criteria, use demographic, clinical, and geographic characteristics. This will ensure that any outliers are not included in your study and thus skewing your results. Like someone's higher BP is 250, you may not want to include that person in your study because it may skew the results for your average BP decrease, right? So the background research here too remains a top resource for seeing any association that would cause an imbalance in your findings. So in your background research, if you find that certain characteristics in patients would affect this result that you hope to get, you'd want to exclude certain patients with scientific reasoning, and not just a way to manipulate data. Um, it would make sense to exclude certain patients, which would skew your findings, which would prevent you from describing exactly what you're trying to describe, right? So consider you are seeing the rates of the COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, in a city like Mumbai, which has polluted air, and a city like Shimla, which is relatively free of pollution and a hill station, right? So you are trying to see if the pollution in Mumbai is causing more people to have COPD. However, it is also possible that more people in Mumbai smoke than Shimla due to urbanization, right? So in a particular study that trying to evaluate rates of COPD between Mumbai and Shimla, you'd maybe want to exclude smokers, right? So the results that you will get would only be focused on people who are developing this condition because of the environment in Mumbai and not because of increased smoking rates in Mumbai, right? So therefore, to eliminate the chance of people questioning you on this thing, you can exclude smokers from both Mumbai and Shimla. Similarly, you can find other sources of COPD causing factors that could skew your results and therefore make your study protocol foolproof, right? So here are some common errors of inclusion and exclusion criteria. Using the same variable in both is an amateurish mistake that people make. For example, if my inclusion criteria, I have mentioned that the study would include only people between 40 and 80, it would be foolish to mention that people above 80 would be excluded from my study. If I'm performing that same study to determine efficacy of beta blocker on hypertension in Indians, it would be foolish to write that people who are living in urban areas and rural areas are included because the research question has nothing to do with this factor, right? So the purpose of these criteria is to help identify your target population. In the same study, since my inclusion criteria was ages between 40 and 80, a physician who is reading the paper and and is basically consulting with people who are suffering from hypertension in their old age, he will know that the findings of my paper, which although may point to the possible benefits of treatment in hypertension with beta blockers, will apply to his population of patients, right? If he is seeing patients above 80 usually, he'll know that the findings of my paper have not proved efficacy of beta blocker in that particular set of patients. It may be effective, may not be effective. My paper has not proved it. So that's the point of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, and also besides such external validity, these factors also allow you to allow your study to present with internal validity, because you are limiting the factors that could affect your results and therefore not give you a true representation of what you're trying to achieve. Same with that Mumbai Shimla concept. If you came out with an amazing paper saying people in Mumbai have 5x more COPD than people in Shimla, It has to do with the pollution in Mumbai because Shimla is a hill station. And you have not mentioned anything about whether or not the people you have included are smokers or non-smokers. A person who is reading that paper that you have submitted to the journal would definitely question you on it and may choose to reject your paper because it's not providing any concrete data on whether the environment in Mumbai is causing this COPD or not, right? So that's why it's important to have this inclusion exclusion criteria for your own sanity and for the sanity of people who are reading your paper. So once you've defined these criteria, what comes next? Don't forget informed consent. As medical students, we have been hearing about informed consent for hours and hours, and we know exactly what it is. Um, you need to prepare your informed consent document. It's important that you make this document beforehand because you will need to submit it along with your research protocol to the ethics committee. There is a checklist of requirements that an informed consent form needs to have before you select it for your study. Um, Therefore, your whole research protocol, along with your questionnaires, if any, and your data handling protocols, have to be sent to the ethics committee for approval. This is a sample list of questions that need to be included in your informed consent document in order to make it legally and ethically valid. And make sure you include all this information when you ask someone to sign that informed consent document. Right? You probably take a screenshot of this. So a lot of people have been confused about what ethics committees are, what their role is, how do you go about getting this permission. So all I would say all teaching hospitals and most other hospitals and colleges have their own ethics committees with their own requirements and their own opinions. It's best to check in with your college ethics committee to determine what sort of format they want and how best you can facilitate that process. So if you contact your librarian or if you contact any residents that they have, because even for their thesis, they require ethics committee approval, they will send you a list of, you've essentially got to prepare a research protocol. How you prepare that research protocol, we'll get into either today or tomorrow. But yeah, so essentially you've got to prepare a research protocol. Once you have prepared that protocol, you have to submit it to an ethics committee for approval. An ethics committee is essentially a group of people that include doctors, lawyers, a common man, and essentially teachers, etc., that will determine whether or not this protocol meets ethical standards and will therefore approve or disapprove it. All right. That's essentially what an ethics committee is, and all papers, even surveys, whatever you are trying to get published in a journal will require ethics committee approval, or will require um, at least a letter saying that this person has submitted to the ethics committee and we have waived his need to get approval, right? So it's actually unethical to collect any sort of data without their approval. Even your telemarketing people have to respond to the government of India and try when they're trying to contact people. So it's not ethical for you to contact people without having this ethics committee approval, right? So any paper, even surveys, need this ethics committee approval if you're trying to get them published in a journal. Journals will definitely ask you to see this letter, or if not, at least confirm with you that you have received this ethics committee approval. Um, and it's usually a very bad situation when if you've lied about getting this approval and the journal finds out later you've not, they retract your article because of this small thing. Although your data is solid, they will have to retract your article and you'll be in a world of academic hurt, right? So it makes more sense to get this ethics committee approval beforehand. So now we've understood the methodology of research and how you need to identify your target population. Depending on your target population, you identify some inclusion and exclusion criteria. Once you have determined your inclusion and exclusion criteria, you move on to preparing the actual research protocol, have an informed consent document ready with you, give it to the ethics committee, wait for their approval, and then start your research, right? And once you started your research, what will you need to do is you'll have to gather your data. Um, Every researcher wants to boast about the amount of data they have, 20,000 patients, 40,000 patients, and we are in awe of their ability to keep so much data. However, it is impossible to collect this much data without first having a plan on how to store and manage that data. So luckily for us students, our data sets are usually small and we don't require sophisticated SQL databases to store our information. Commercially available products can usually do the trick. So how to prepare a data management plan? You need to ask yourself three questions. What is the information that you're going to be collecting? Is it just text-based information? Is it pictures? Is it videos? Is it X-rays? Is it MRI, CDs, etc.? What information you're going to collect? How are you going to get the information? Through personal interviews, phone calls, surveys or questionnaires sent through emails, scan through medical records to get patient information, and what is the data that will be analyzed? What is the statistical plan to analyze the information you get? This part of the data management plan could be done with the assistance of a statistician, and you definitely need to have that. You should definitely consult a statistician before you collect your data, because they will give you tips on what the way to collect the data so that it's most efficient for use in their statistical programs. Yeah. So I will talk a little on statistics and its use in the research environment. But the sample size essentially refers to the minimum number of participants you need as part of your study in order to make inferences about the study population. Okay. So for example, if I want to study the effect of that beta blocker on people who have hypertension, I will need to take an adequate number of people who have hypertension to say that my results can apply to my target population, right? I cannot take one or two individuals because they might have some specific interactions with a drug that are not duplicated by the rest of the population. However, if I have enough people, the average of their interactions might help me determine how the average population might act, right? So if I'm just taking one or two people from say the city of Mumbai who have hypertension and saying, oh, their BP has decreased very well. It's now in their 120s. And it's a great drug for elderly people who have hypertension, this beta blocker. But is that result applicable to all Indians or at least all Mumbaikars who are suffering from hypertension? No. Right? So that's why there are some statistical tests done based on your background research, which your statistician will ask for you for, based on the power of the study, based on your level of significance, etc., that you arrive at a sample size. So that's why I say you should consult a statistician first, determine how many people minimum people you will need for your study to be effective, and for people to say, okay, this guy has this many people, which means that his study is effective, right? And that number can range from 15 to 1,000, depending on how many, depending on how prevalent the disease or the condition it is that you're studying. Right? So there's no one sample size fits all approach. It's definitely important to consult a statistician before you analyze the sample size, because if you don't meet that sample size criteria, you don't your if results are essentially useless to the target population, right? So you say, okay, sample size sab theek hai. Why can't I just take 1,000 people? And I'm sure that would be a good enough sample size, right? But you might be right. 1,000 is a large sample size. However, especially at the undergraduate level, it's impossible to accrue this much data. Our hospitals may not have that many patients for us to evaluate these 1,000 patients, and we may not have the funding to give the beta blocker to all 1,000 patients. Therefore, we evaluate the sample size to make sure that at least statistically, we will not be skewing this data if we are meeting the minimum requirement for number of people to be part of the study, right? Now, if it's something as simple as a survey where I'm sending it to 50,000 people, 1,000 reply, and I'm getting this sample size, that's one of the simplest studies that a undergraduate level medical student can do. However, if I'm doing an intervention based study where I'm trying to determine in medical students whether or not the MCQ test yields better academic performance over time than a SAQ LAQ test. I could not possibly get 1,000 medical students from 1 year and follow them through over 5 to 6 years to see the academic performance, right? So you have to be rational about it usually, and you have to see whether or not it's feasible and if you need additional funding. So once you have arrived at that minimum number of people that you need, which is your sample size, it's okay if you have a few extra because some people are expected to leave your study, but you need to have that minimum number to make sure that um, your study results are feasible, statistically feasible, right? So let's move on to questionnaire surveys. This is what a lot of people are doing nowadays. You see people WhatsApping you incessantly, hey, I'm doing this survey on depression in medical students, or students and doctors, and how you'd answer it. It's one of the popular ways for undergraduate people to get in survey, get into research. However, it should be done appropriately and not just something that you make a Google form in 5 minutes and send it to 50,000 people, right? So what you need for question surveys is a sampling frame from which you can choose your representative sample. So I can maybe say I want only medical students, I want only physiotherapists, or only occupational therapy, EST, etc. Right? You need to identify who you are targeting or who you are sending this um, sort of questionnaire to. A survey instrument that's been vetted. You could possibly use um, so your a Google Forms or any sort of instrument that you use to have make sure that it's vetted and you get appropriate results. There's no fudging of data within that form, you know. And invitation to encourage participation. Obviously, you send people WhatsApp, you send people emails, etc. You need a means of dissemination, whether you're calling people, emailing them, sending them postal mail, and a method of following up with non-respondents. The surveys that we had done in the SRS, the Scoliosis Research Society, where we had sent emails to surgeons just to determine how often minimally invasive surgery is used in adult spine deformity. We had a way of following up with non-responders where we emailed them after 7 days and again after 7 days to make sure that that representative sample that we really want is appropriate, right? So it's not that, oh, I missed this person once, so I can try to get that person back in, right? So if the Scoliosis Research Society has 50,000 members, if I have only 20,000, the more the people, the more accurate my results would be, right? And you need a plan and method for analyzing results that you can talk to your statistician about. Uh, and the advantages and disadvantages of questionnaire surveys is advantages that you can collect personal data or risk factor data without any hospital or ambulatory care record. And you can elicit information in an analytical way. But you got to understand that some people call their surveys questionnaires, and there's a distinct difference between the two. A questionnaire is something that has a pilot study already done on it, right? So a questionnaire is something that has been vetted by experts, that has been used, that has been shown to be effective in getting or identifying a particular thing, right? So, for example, you might have heard about a lot of these questionnaires that are present in your psychiatry, right? So there, those questionnaires have been vetted by experts. They have been used in patients. The useless questions have been removed. Some interesting questions have been added to make sure that the result you get is clinically significant and can be relied upon, right? Difference between questionnaires and surveys is that surveys do not need to be vetted. So when you're writing a paper on surveys, make sure you mention it's survey and not questionnaire, because a questionnaire is something that needs to be vetted with a pilot study by experts, etc. Right? And the next type of study that you can do is interview responses. Whether you want to call people, recruit people that you want to interview, You have an interview protocol with exclusively open-ended questions, a skilled interviewers, and a way to record the interviews and either summarize or transcribe them. So if you're trying to determine, so like a study that we did was we were trying to, so that's a condition called clubfoot, right? And these patients would come to the clubfoot clinic, and they would not come back for follow-up. So these guys, this is from a government hospital in Mumbai. So these people did not have access to emails, but we fortunately had access to their telephone numbers. And we realized that a lot of these people had changed their numbers. So out of maybe I think about 500 patients, we could get in contact with only 300, right? The rest 200 actually changed their numbers. Um, so how we use this to um, affect our clinical day-to-day functioning was we started asking patients who came in for a second number or a third number, so that at least they're contactable for a follow-up, right? So that's why it's important. That's how it changed the way that this clubfoot clinic works, and that's how that data affected us, right? And that's the whole point of you conducting a research, is for you to understand um, what the reader would benefit from this, or how the reader would change his practice, on how maybe his patients would benefit, not only just yours, right? So when you're performing an interview, you need skilled interviewers. So if I'm talking about a government college in Maharashtra and the patients are primarily Marathi speaking, I would require a person who speaks Marathi, and I would be completely lost, would not be able to get the information if I've hired a person who is talking English, right? So you need to identify skilled interviewers. You need to give them usually a transcript to make sure that the responses are equivalent between patient to patient, and not just because this particular group of patient happens to be from this person's village, so they're giving more truthful answers, etc. Um, so uh, you need to make sure that it's a standardized format of asking questions whenever you're conducting a telephonic interview. And once you have that, make sure that you have enough for fail safes to for that person who is taking the interview to then enter the data that they've received in an Excel sheet or whatever Google form or whatever format that you're using, right? You can also get retrospective data from hospital care records, where if you're trying to determine, say, the results of a particular, say, medulloblastoma, right? If you're trying to determine whether the surgery for medulloblastoma was successful, and how often were they able to completely remove the tumor, how often were they not, etc. So you could go back into hospital care records. You could see what each patient went through, how long their surgery was, how much blood they lost, etc. And this will give information to someone who's trying to start with doing this medulloblastoma surgery, that what is the average blood loss, how much should I be prepared with, etc. Right? So hospital care records, interviews, surveys are all ways of you to do research. They are ways commonly used by medical students um, to perform this research, right? So that's something that you can definitely do. This is some examples of handy tools for gathering quantitative data. I know we all know Google Forms. It's a basic form. You can set up validation rules for answers, which means that if you have asked someone for a telephone number, Google has that option of saying, okay, you can only accept this answer if it has 10 digits and not a letter included in them, right? However, the fallback of Google Forms is no conditional logic or branching, which basically means that if I have answered yes to this question, then I jump to maybe say question 10 instead of answering questions 8, 9, 10. So essentially, if you've seen questionnaires with if yes, then dot, 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 dot. So I can essentially, if a person has answered no to that, I can avoid that question, make the form seem smaller for them so that I get more response rate. Because a lot of times, if you have long forms, people choose to just quit midway because they have better stuff to do and they're not getting paid for it, right? Um, so conditional logic helps you decrease the number of responses, decrease the number of questions that a person has to answer, increase your number of responses, and overall helps you to maintain a form that's not too complicated for the respondent to understand. So another alternative to this is something called Survey Monkey. There's something called Survey Sparrow. There's something called Typeform, which a lot of people use, which are available, which have all this logic and branching. And usually they have free for about 100 responses. After that, it's paid. It's maybe $9 to $10 a month or something like that. But usually our studies go on for maybe a month or two. So maybe 1,000, 2,000 rupees odd expense that you carry. But if it's useful to you, then it'll definitely help with your condition and logic and might increase your response rates. Again, Airtable is something I personally use. It's more geared towards collecting data for non-survey related studies. If you want to go back to hospital records, it's easier than Excel sheet. It'll give you tons of features that are present on it. It is also free for up to 1,200 records and 2 GB of data. So you can definitely use Airtable. It's a great tool. And it's something that you should definitely consider. So once you've determined your data collection plans, you need to formulate your own data management plan, right? So you need to avoid certain errors that are done in studies. The three basic types of errors that are performed is producing bad data, errors of data management, and errors of statistical analysis, right? So, uh, so however, there may be an error in filling up by a participant or an input of the answers into the database by a technician. Sometimes amateur statisticians may apply a wrong test to a particular data set and come up with a result that is statistically significant. However, that too would be a false representation of the data that you have. So, in so just so the first form of error is producing bad data, right? So if you have low quality collection methods, if your study design or sampling techniques are weak, it can lead to consistent and statistically significant correlations in the opposite direction from the true correlation, right? So, for example, in a self-reported energy intake study that has been used to estimate actual energy intake. So if you ask people, if you're trying to determine their caloric intake for the past week, and you're trying to determine whether or not they're obese because of that. This method involves asking people to recall their dietary intake in one or more ways, and then deriving an estimate of the calories that they have consumed. But would you think this would be effective if I ask you, what did you have 2 days ago for lunch? You probably wouldn't be able to give me an answer, right? So that error could possibly produce bad data. Instead, you could ask someone what they ate today and record what they're eating tomorrow and come back to you the next week, or make a diary for 1 week and then come back to you the next week, instead of asking them what they ate a week before, so that you have more objective data and it is valid and not just limited and right. Bad data is usually the worst form of error and one of the most egregious of errors, because there is no way to correct this bad data, because the way you have collected the data is itself bad. So once you have received this data from the respondent, it'll be very hard for you to go back to that person saying, oops, I collected this in a bad way. Could you do this again for me? 9 times out of 10, most people will not respond positively to that, and you lose on a lot of respondents that way, right? So make sure that the way you're collecting the data that you are collecting is right, and it would be useful for your statistician and not just go to waste because they can't use it in statistics tests. There could be errors in data management, errors in initial documents copied to the database. If you have 50 Excel sheets, you may make an error in copy pasting it into one Excel sheet, etc. There could be errors of interpretation of data in the initial document, where a patient has written something on a document, you've asked the patient to write, and the person you've assigned to make sure that it all goes on an Excel sheet is not able to read exactly what that is. That could be an error there. So instead of doing that, just avoid filling that completely. So that's another form of error of data management. So the way to prevent this is you need to establish checklists. If values are missing for one individual, it's better to avoid including the individual in statistical analysis. If you just included, if 8 out of 9 values that you've taken are missing for one individual, it's better to avoid using that person. Um, uh, so we asked authors once to share data from a publication with implausible baseline imbalances and other statistical anomalies. They were unable to produce the data, and the journal then retracted the paper. The data, however, unlike bad data, is still redeemable. There is no flaw in the study design, and therefore missing or wrong values can be corrected, right? So if you have the original paper with you, you can say, okay, this doesn't say 40, this says 80. So there has been a problem in transcribing that data. So you can go back and fix it. You don't need to go back to the respondent to recollect that data, which would be the worst form of error. So some statistical tests need to have some assumptions met. You can't apply a t-test, a paired t-test, unpaired t-test to all sort of statistical analysis between two groups. We'll not dive into the depths of these tests as they're beyond the scope of this workshop. However, if there are certain assumptions to this test, all these tests that need to be met by your data, right? So if, although your statistical analysis package will analyze that data for you, if your assumptions uh, for this particular test is not met, then you will be getting false results and you'll be projecting false results in your paper, right? So this will be a waste of time for and resources for everyone involved in the study, as well as any person who decides to read and prescribe to patients based on your study, right? It's best to consult a good statistician before you start your data collection and after you finish it, so that you're not um, stuck with a bad form of statistical analysis and statistical tests. I know we're all aware of the t-test. It cannot be used for all data. There's something called parametric and non-parametric variables, and your data needs to be analyzed before it can be put in a test. So now to establish a data plan, you plan exactly what you're going to collect, how you're going to collect it, etc. You discover existing data that's there through your background research, your references, how they collected it, what values did they see were important. Maybe you want to collect them. Maybe you want a combination of values that were collected over 4 or 5 papers. You should assure your data quality by having certain checklists in place. Describe the data that you're going to collect. Then you can use and preserve the data. Um, uh, you can use the data for statistical analysis and preserve the data to make sure that you may use it for future studies if needed. So rule 1 is identify data to be collected. A good first step is to list the various types of data that you expect to collect or create. This may include your text, spreadsheets, softwares, algorithms, images, audio files, patient records, whatever you need. Make sure you have a list of it with you. Note that many research sponsors define data broadly to include physical collections, software and code, and curriculum materials. Data may come from different human observations, laboratories, and field experiments, simulations, etc. Both uh, identify the volume of data that is to be collected, so that if, say, you have a free package of Airtable, which is only for 2 GB, make sure that you are collecting only till 2 GB if you don't want to pay or if you don't have funding to pay for the premium version. And just make sure that you have an approximate idea of how much volume that you're going to collect and when you're going to stop, right? Whenever you're collecting data, a good format is to use CSV or an Excel file instead of a PDF or written material. It's best to have your data digital so that you're not stuck with replicating your hard work and from paper to digital, right? So after you've done that, you define how data will be managed. Small data can be tables will be generated that can be effectively managed with commercial programs like Excel and Office Calc. Larger may require some use of databases, but that's we can usually use Excel and Open Office Calc for our needs, and we could identify some charts from it that could be used in publishing your data. And describe how quality will be assured. Have training activities for the interviewers that you have. Make sure that your instruments are calibrated. Whenever you're using an instrument in your study, you have to mention the company of the instrument that you're using, as well as the model number, to make sure that if someone was to replicate that study, they would get the same results. So make sure that the instruments you're using are calibrated, are well, to have a low sort of margin of error, and have a checklist ready with you where you can evaluate errors, what you're going to do with missing values, impossible conditions, and any checklist violations, right? And make sure you have a data preservation strategy and determine how it'll be accessible in the future, because once you have published your paper to a journal, someone may come to you in the future and tell you, hey, I would love to see the data behind this. I don't think that what you have published is right. Then you need your data on hand, and therefore it would make sense for you to keep your data, whether it's on the cloud or it's on a personal hard drive, whatever you need, to make sure that you can access it in the future if anyone asks you. So what I personally adhere to is 3 copies in 3 geographically distributed locations. So I have one on the cloud, one on external hard drive, and one right here on my laptop, so that even if one's destroyed, I have backup from the others. And make sure that you keep your data confidential. Doctor-patient confidentiality doesn't end with someone signing an informed consent form. Make sure that you keep it confidential. You're not sharing it with any third parties or companies that may ask you for access to patient data. It's imperative that you do this. And make your data statistician friendly. Define your variables. Try not to leave any questions open-ended. Assign numbers to insanity of an event. For example, if you are asking someone, how were you feeling after surgery? What was the pain level? Don't say extremely painful, very painful. Have a scale of, say, 1 to 9, so that you have a number associated with that pain, instead of having just a bunch of letters which may not be able to be used in statistical analysis. And before you start your survey or before you start your questionnaire, try to find other tools that are available for a particular variable. For example, the pain study that I just mentioned, there's something called a VAS score, which essentially is a point score from 0 to 9, from not painful to very painful, that you can use in your study, which is already pre-vetted, which so you don't have to create a new scale where you're going from 0 to 5. So make sure that you're looking for these things before you actually send out your data to many people. So send out your survey to many people, because it validates your study more than something you created would, right? So most studies in psychological experiments usually have open-ended questions and interviews. There's something called a qualitative research paper instead of a quantitative one, where you are talking about subjective feelings that cannot be converted to quantitative objective evidence. They're usually smaller case studies. They involve in-depth interviews of patients, usually maybe 10 to 15 patients, which are then published on, say, how a person with schizophrenia is feeling after 20 days of therapy, right? So there's something called quantitative papers if someone wants to get into that. We won't be getting into that in this research workshop, maybe in some future ones. But that's what qualitative data is for. It's usually for psychiatric and psychological experiments. That brings us to the end of how to manage and store your data. Do we find any questions?
Yeah, there are a few questions. What happens if we don't manage to reach our sample size?
What happens if you don't manage to reach your sample size? You should reach your sample size. It shouldn't be that hard.
Like suppose
Keep the
like
study going
somebody
on. Keep the study going on. I mean, that's not a. Keep the study going on instead of 3 months collected for 4 months. You have to reach the sample size for that data to make statistical sense, right? That's the whole point of a sample size. If you can't reach it, doesn't mean you abandon that project completely. Keep it ongoing till you focus on other projects.
Okay. While using hospital care records, how can we get informed consent from the patients?
So someone has mentioned when you use hospital records, it comes under retrospective studies. Informed consent is not necessary. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. You do need informed consent from the patient. So maybe you can get a telephonic consent from them saying, hey, we are, usually be a surgeon who has done it. So what a lot of surgeons do in Mumbai is whichever patient comes to them, they have a paper in their sort of patient file, which is an informed consent for future studies. I know it's a blanket informed consent, which may or may not be applicable, but they usually have that. So they have a signed document from the patient saying that it's okay to use their data. So that medical records, if you all might have known from FM, belong to the patient, is just carried by the hospital for them. So informed consent is absolutely necessary. So you might have a telephone number associated with that patient, which you can just contact, and you can get at least a telephonic informed consent. So there's no legal process that you have to go through later in life. Yeah.
There's one more question. Is it true that questionnaire-based research studies are not considered that valuable nowadays?
That's not true. It's just that people have been doing questionnaires on any and everything under the sun. If you see COVID, people have started studies with how are medical students feeling, how are interns feeling, how are residents feeling, how are doctors feeling, what do you think is the appropriate this thing, what has your college done, what has my college done. So it's got a bad name because a lot of people are using it for things that are wrong, are using questions that don't actually give any objective data to anyone around. So yes, they are the most common form of conducting surveys. I wouldn't say they aren't important. It just depends on how you frame your questions, who you're asking, what you're asking. If you have a good set of questions, if you're getting good sort of data from them, some objective data which can be used in the future. Because if I ask you how are you feeling about COVID today, and I have 1,000 medical students with them, what sort of change in clinical practice, what sort of change in government policy am I expecting from that data, right? So before you start out on a research, just try to think about what sort of change you are trying to bring, whether it's in someone's practice or it's or whether it's in maybe government policy or whatever that you want to bring a change in before you move on to asking people random questions. So that's why it's gotten a bad name, but I wouldn't say that it's not as important. It's actually absolutely the most common form of evidence that you'd find.
Is ethics committee approval necessary for systematic review?
Yes, because you have to have a proper. See, why ethics committee approval is important is see, we as medical students don't have that much access to companies and stuff, right? So companies are not paying us, or we are not sponsored by companies to conduct research. But why ethics committee approval becomes important in a systematic review is because you personally, if you're a motivated individual by a pharma company, could use certain keywords which have only been used in papers that are supporting a particular drug, right? And then you publish a systematic review saying, okay, hey, I've done the systematic review on this drug and it looks absolutely amazing. It's a great drug, right? So ethics committee approval is not just to make sure that you don't commit any human rights violations. It's also to make sure that the method you have used is an effective one, is a fair one, is a transparent one, and will not yield results that are biased, right? So if you approach your ethics committee with a protocol and they say, okay, hey, like your protocol is perfect, you don't need approval from us. Ethics committee do that as well, but they give you a letter saying ethics committee approval has been waived for this project. But you still need to approach an ethics committee to make sure that there's no problems for you when you're publishing in a journal. Any other questions?
Actually, which is the best way of research method? Questionnaire, observation, scientific content analysis, or a survey method? So
This is a difficult question to answer. However, like I spoke about the levels of evidence. So the level of evidence is highest with randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis and systematic reviews. Moves on to non-controlled trials or non-randomized trials. Goes to cohort studies. Goes to case reports, etc. So the best way to find out the answer to your question is, of course, a randomized controlled trial if it's not been done before. But we usually don't have the resources available with us. But I would say for a student, a medical student who's trying to get into research, the best way is either to consult with a particular person about a controversial topic in a particular field. Say, suppose you're talking about a proximal humerus fracture in adults, right? It's for those of you who don't know, it's a controversial topic, and people choose to use different implants and different techniques when they're trying to repair this. So it'd be interesting to know what the general consensus of, say, orthopedics in India is about that particular topic. So there, that survey would give us information. Okay, this, although it's a controversial topic, this is what Indian people are doing. Then you could repeat that maybe in another country with some surgeon there. You contact them. Hey, we did this project in India. We would like to do it in the US or the UK, just to see what the differing opinion is. Although literature says this, we found out this, etc. So that's where it could come in handy, and a medical student could do that. Or the second way is to approach faculty from your college. Say, sir, I have found this particular topic very interesting. We have done so many cases. I think our government college sees 50 cases a day. People are doing 20 cases. They publish this paper. I'd like to go back into medical records, because every college has a medical record department where you need permission from the HOD or the dean to access it. Okay, I'd like to go back to the MRD and see what these patients suffered from, what their etiology was, and how they have progressed from there. So that could definitely be done by medical students. I think that's a very effective way to start research, where you have someone guiding you. They have active interest in that paper as well, because that's something they have done. That's something from their field, and that's something definitely that medical students can do.
and actually, I personally had one question regarding ethics committee
Yeah, let
approval.
me know.
So basically, what happens is what's happening now is all our colleges are closed. So the hospitals are like everything is closed. So the ethics committee is also like not available right now to approve our projects. So how do we go about this? Like, do we like suspend it till
See, it
colleges
depends
reopen,
on.
or do we have any other alternative methods?
Okay, so look, so you, just because you're a student of your college does not mean you need ethics committee approval from your college. Okay, you can approach private hospitals which have maybe a DNB, this thing, where they'll have their own ethics committee, which may be open, may not be open. Um, you can definitely approach them. However, if you're trying to get data from your college, I am sure that your administration will insist that you get ethics committee approval from there only. So there you're stuck. I'm sorry, there's no solution to that. But if you're trying to maybe do a survey, or if you're trying to figure out some things that you want to do on your own or with a private practitioner, you can definitely approach these private hospital ethics committees, or email them, and they'll most of them should be able to help you out.
And there's one more question. Suppose we start a project with 500 people, like sample size 500 people, but because of attrition, what happens is like we have only 200 people now. So in that case, our sample size is going to be 500 or 200.
Depends on what you're getting from them. Sample size. No, so see, your sample size eventually. See, if I'm trying to study the follow-up effects of chemotherapy, right? I'm gonna have attrition. People are gonna die. People are gonna say no to chemotherapy. So obviously, your number of people will decrease. So that's why when you are recruiting, when they recruit for these randomized control trials, if their calculated minimum sample size that they need is 50, they recruit 150 people, because they know that there is going to be attrition, there is going to be death, there is going to be people who are leaving the study, right? So again, that depends on what information you are getting from them, whether you are getting the information from them from the start, and the latter information really doesn't matter. So, I mean, you have to mention that in your paper anyways. So a paper doesn't have a statement saying my sample size is 1,000, right? You can say we started off with 500, got this much information from 500, but this information we could only get from 200. And that's fair. If it's statistically significant, that's fair. If the sample it's above the sample size, that's absolutely fair. Right?
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Done with the questions?
Yeah.
ठीक है. Now let us go to, okay, so let's go to how to quickly read a research article. Let's do that. Let's see some research articles. Perfect. So we spoke a lot about how we are going to search on PubMed. We're going to get all these amazing articles, and how we're going to filter down on PubMed. But once we do get these articles, how are we planning to read through them? Are we, with our heavy reading of Harrison and Ganong, etc., are we going to really spend so much time reading these articles? So there is a way to quickly read a research article to determine at least whether or not it's important for you, right? Because even when you filter down from PubMed, you're still going to get a lot of results that you want to determine quickly whether this is applicable to my research or not. So you have to determine whether you want to spend more time on it, if it's relevant to your research. So this is just an example of how articles are framed. They have a title, an abstract, introductions, material methods, results, discussion, conclusions, and references, right? So this is from top to bottom, right? How the flow of an article exists in majority of the publications. So first thing that you need to do is, whenever you come across an article, a PDF of an article, is read the title and the keywords of written in that article. Then you can move on to the abstract. So the abstract, as I mentioned yesterday, is a short, a brief of what the article is about, what results they found, and what the conclusion was from the study. And that give you an essential idea of whether or not this article is important for your background research or not. So you can quickly filter it if you think the abstract has nothing to do with whatever you're trying to research. If we're talking about, if you're trying to research whether a blood test with a particular marker is enough for diagnosing liver cirrhosis. If they're talking about using USG for diagnosing liver cirrhosis in the abstract itself, you can completely disregard it and exclude it from your background research. Once you've read the abstract, you should jump directly to the conclusion, so that you know what they're trying to say in brief is the result of this whole article, right? Once you're done with the conclusion, you go see the tables and figures where they have mentioned exactly what they have found, what are the differences between groups, etc. Then you go to the introduction, because introduction is the place where they are essentially trying to introduce the concept of the article to you. So if they're talking about this particular protein that they use in liver cirrhosis, they talk about what other proteins are used, if there are other, if this has already been studied before in other studies, what they found, etc. So if you find that this article is useful enough for you from the title and keywords and abstracts and conclusions, you move on to tables and figures and introduction. Where introduction, you will also find other papers that have mentioned this, that this article has mentioned, which have a similar sort of finding or a similar sort of information that you seek. After that, you jump into the results and discussion, because the abstract has given you a basic idea of what this study is trying to say. And then once you have read that, you go from introduction to results and discussion. And then if at all you need, you go to the materials and methods, because material and methods essentially could possibly be jargon for someone who doesn't understand it completely. And therefore, it's the last thing that you need to read, because it would give you an exact step-by-step guide of how the person has done it. So it could prove useful to you if you are planning to conduct a similar study. However, it should be done after reading the results and discussions, because then you get a basic idea of what this concept is, what are the other papers on this concept, um, what is the current standing today, how this paper is different from other papers, etc. So that's the essential way of reading a paper. So I think let's do something here. Let's search for a paper and let's read it. So guys, just give me a title or some topic.
COVID-19 in
इतना
vaccinated
मत
people.
बोल दो. ठीक है, चलो. Let's spread some knowledge. That's how I show this. So COVID-19. I see COVID-19 as a descriptor. So COVID-19 could be one of my keywords. I search vaccine. Vaccine is a mesh heading. Vaccine could be one of my major topics. So I go to advanced search, COVID-19, right? With space. No, that was a dash, right? I say add. Oops. I didn't select mesh major topic. So I say COVID-19 add. Then I want to type vaccines, which is another mesh major topic. Add with and if I want to see qualifiers of COVID-19, let's see. Maybe I just search this. Maybe I want to search if there is a recurrence, right? Recurrence is a mesh major topic, so I can modify my search term and add the word recurrence to it. Right, so it becomes COVID-19 and vaccines and recurrence. So let's see what searches I get. So although this will limit, because this will limit my results to very few. SARS-CoV-19 reinfection and implication for vaccine development. It's a 2020 study. Oh, my recurrent spelling was wrong. Yeah. So this will give me a paper here. On the right, you will see view full text because COVID-19, they made everything free. But I want to go to some recent ones. Let's see the safety and efficacy of the Chadox vaccine, which is the Covishield that's available today. I go to the Lancet Open Access. If you see the link right here, it says full text links. So PubMed also gives you options to, you can save this particular paper. You can email this paper to whoever you want, or you can send to. So citation manager is something like an EndNote or a Mendeley that people use to make sure that their references are in order. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. But that's the way you can send to citation manager and it download it on your screen. Or you can send to my bibliography, which is something like the my library sort of this thing present in Google Scholar. You can display options if you want the PM ID, etc. That's not super important. You could save it as your favorites. But here, now suppose I'm interested in this. I'll read the title and say, okay, I'm trying to convince my parents, or I'm trying to convince my uncle that the Covishield vaccine is safe and it's safe to use in people. And I come up with this paper. I see that it has RC. It's essentially a randomized controlled trial, which has been done in Brazil, South Africa, and the UK. I go down. I see the abstract. I see the background, which you all know about the COVID vaccine and stuff now. Then I jump to their interpretation. And if I find that it has bearing on what I want to say, then I would go to their findings, see exactly what went through. Vaccine efficacy was 62%, um, and in participants who received low dose, etc. So this would be my initial analysis of whether this paper is useful to me or not. If it is, I go to the Lancet Open Access, or if you see this PMC full text free. PMC is a database which handles, which essentially has all free full text available for you. So you can just search here in the PMC database itself, and whatever results you get will be free full text available. So here I see the free. Here I see the full text. Um, I I go down to the conclusion, see exactly what they're trying to say. So this is a 4 RCT. This is going to be a long article. Oops. So once I have that super long article, yeah. So I've read their interpretation. I've read the abstract. Now I move on to read their uh, results and their discussion. So these are results that they have, and I read the tables along with them in the context that they have put them, because the journal obviously knows where exactly what table belongs. So here I have all the information that I could possibly need. This is in UK and Brazil, etc. The number of people, N is the number of people that have been part of this study. Um, I'm trying to determine whether in young people, how many face adverse effects, etc. How many had comorbidities. So usually the first table that's present um, in a paper will give you the demographic information like age, sex, ethnicity, any comorbidities, etc., that are present, and that's usually what the first table is for. Then you move on to you see the table title, you see efficacy against SARS-CoV more than 14 days after the dose of this thing. You find information over here. So I'm reading the results, then I'll move on to the discussion, which will place the results that they have gotten in context with what is already known about this disease, so that I have an overall idea on where this study sits, whether it's providing additional information to previous studies or it's contradicting previous studies, etc. So that's something that you can find out from the discussion. And once that's done, I can go back, read the introduction, so I have a basic idea of what this whole thing is. I can save it as a PDF, or yeah, add it to my favorites, etc. So that's essentially what searching an article is about, and finding out articles from this PubMed database is about, and that's how you should go about doing things. Because I was giving this particular example, but now if I just wanted to say this is important to me, then consider this is important to me, this is important to me. So now I'll just send them all to my bibliography or my collections or clipboard, so that I can filter them out one by one, so that I'm not too worried about um, you know um, seeing the whole thing, jumping back to this page, going to the next study. So at least I have all the studies that I need to review in one page with me, because I know I'm not going to be able to review all of them together in one sitting in one day. So that's why it's important that you have filtered them, and then you can go back to that filter instead of having to search again. And you may have missed an and or an or or a not here, and you find completely different results. Um, so I think that's pretty clear, and I think that about ends the time we have for today. But I'd be love to take any other questions that anyone has. If not, then we can end today's session and meet tomorrow. Any questions? Okay. Not seeing any. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to host you guys. Hope to see you guys tomorrow, where we'll be discussing actually how to make a manuscript, and we'll be talking about EndNote and how to use that to make sure references are not muddled up. Yeah. So and again, please remember to follow us on Instagram, IMA-MSN Telangana, and PubGeek, and please subscribe to our channel because you'll be updated with everything else. The videos coming to the IMA-MSN channel as well. I haven't been able to share it with them, and yeah, should be fun. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye bye.